want to say this is the most high-tech I've ever been rigged up here. I'm wired. And in the light of the FBI's recent arrests of Earth First editor and leader Dave Foreman, and well, I'll have to be more moderate than I expected to be originally. I like to ground my poems in a sense of place and in nature's time, which I think is the time of the passage of seasons. Seed pod and resinous cone. Earth turns into the brittle season, washed and chilled by rain. Crickets now have little to say. To silent roots the trees draw down the sugar in their veins. Wild geese point out routes for summer dreamers. Faded leaves hang, faltering in wet wind. How I freeze for the warmth and ease of the sun. But no need to give the cold more scope than all of a sparse season. Secrets are visible now. Seed pod and resinous cone reveal a symmetry that settles me. I can be still, outwait the shortened light. This is not dying, only a necessary step deeper in. Fire is a dear friend who won't let you embrace him. His warmth and light give counsel and good cheer. Open the gates of the heart to the world far beyond here. That was a little poem by the Swedish Lapp poet Paulus Utsi, who died unfortunately in 1980. He was a preserver of the old ways, the traditional ways of the Lapp people in Sweden. And my ancestors come from Sweden, and since nature makes such a big a thing of having roots, I try to in my poetry readings. My ancestors were not Lapp, but they have in common with Paulus Utsi very deep love of the land. And the family farm in Sweden, which I visited, has been in the family for over 400 years, as far back as any of the records go. And I'm very proud of that rootedness in the land. I think it's increasingly important that we find out, that we learn about our past, our own individual pasts, and make connections backward as technological culture zooms forward and fragments all of us more and more. Well, my Swedish grandfather moved to the Connecticut River Valley from Sweden, and my father migrated down to the Lehigh Valley from Connecticut, and I was born in Bethlehem. And since earliest childhood, I have wandered along a creek, the Monocacy Creek, which runs through the center of Bethlehem. It's a unique stream in that it's a live trout stream in a fairly large-sized industrial town. And it empties into the Lehigh River. Monocacy and Lehigh are Lenape Indian names, and it gave me a great deal of fortification to learn several years ago about the Lenape roots of the industrial city of Bethlehem and the culture, to think that less than 300 years ago, a totally different paradigm of how humans related to the earth and to other animals and to the world was alive and flourishing in the now industrial city of Bethlehem. And since I've gotten back in touch with that vision of life, I feel it and try to keep it alive in Bethlehem. I think it's really important for us to do whatever we can in this time when even the future of the existence of nature is in question. You may have read about the recent book, The Death of Nature. I think it's important to make whatever openings we can to allow the natural world to go on existing, to allow for wildness in our midst, and to allow for other creatures to share the planet with us, because all of life is really endangered because of us at this time in our history. When I did begin to read about the Lenape origin of the Lehigh Valley, I found that it was a wonderful source of material for poetry, and a lot of my poems seem to come from a Native American vision. Not all of them, though. This is a Monocacy poem, but very contemporary. In the season of possibilities, in the real world, in spring, I wander with my dog along a river, and the river's our own. No one else puts up a claim this early in March. Only the purple mottled hoods of skunk cabbage and coltsfoot trotting green all over the ground. The water wanders with ducks on its back. They live here year-round in this room that's my spring cabin. We're old acquaintances. They always remember my dog. Soon we'll step out the back door of April into the silkweed and blue-eyed grasses of May. Now, though, the first yellow fuzz begins its whisper at the top of a willow. Oh, this capable river, such handiwork, such implicit high technology, and I am still a small creek of a girl playing beside it for all my years. I think somehow we're really in danger with our high-tech solutions to the problems of human life, of losing the true healing power that is within the natural world. As we destroy the Amazon forest, we have no idea what potential botanicals and pharmaceuticals we're destroying in the process. And I think in the human frame of time, we always want to go faster and faster, which is very strange. And we want instant food, we want instant cures to illnesses. But nature's time is really very slow and gradual, and yet the healing is a true healing. It's not just a cure from which one can have a relapse. It's really important because there is nature still in each one of us to try and get down, to strip away the culture that has overlaid so many of its own notions, and to come down to the inner nature, which is in touch with the universal nature in each one of us. To give you a sense of one of the people who's influenced my thought, I'd just like to read a brief passage from John Muir, who is the founder of the Sierra Club. And every time we have a mayoral election in Bethlehem, I always write him in as a write-in candidate, but he hasn't made much of a wave yet in Bethlehem. He said, nature's object in making animals and plants might possibly be, first of all, the happiness of each one of them, not the creation of everything for the happiness of one species. Why should man value himself as more than an infinitely small composing unit of the one great unit of creation? The universe would be incomplete without man, but it would also be incomplete without the smallest transmicroscopic creature that dwells beyond our conceitful eyes and knowledge. And I feel that in the times we live in right now, the loss of species, the loss of habitat, which is causing the death of so many species, is a great tragedy, and that somehow we need, as a nation and as a world, to reverse that tide and to become aware of our habits, of our consumerism, which is causing the extinction of species, which it seems so unfair and you know, from an egalitarian point of view. And it comes about because for so long, I think the industrial mode of viewing the interrelationship between animals and humans and nature has been that humans exist at the top of the pyramid to exploit whatever is underneath them, including other humans. And we really have to move away from that form of thinking, from our consumerism, from our wastefulness. I think almost every community right now is trying to deal with the trash problem that industrial culture and consumerism have brought about. And you know, nature's way is to recycle and to restore, but we just throw away, and out of sight, out of mind. So the Victorian flush toilet was probably one of the worst inventions ecologically, but there's so many things we have to change, and I feel that to make a start, just refuse plastic bags when you go shopping. In Europe, until recently, they always used net bags. People would bring their own bags from home or baskets, but the whole disposable notion of our culture is, I think we've run it to its full extreme, and we really need to change our own habits, starting now. I don't know if any of you belong to Defenders of Wildlife, but they have published this alarming list of endangered and threatened species. And just to open it up is alarming, I think. 300 mammals and many other fishes, birds, reptiles, crustaceans, spiders. Well, I saw the comet in Bethlehem in 1986 when it was making one of its rare transits through our end of the galaxy. And I don't know, did anyone else go out and look for Halley's Comet at that time? It made there were several good nights for viewing it. And the last good night, I remember, it was 4 in the morning, was supposed to be the ideal time for seeing it. And so I thought of a dark place on the back of South Mountain in Bethlehem. And my good old dog went out with me into the night. And when we got there, there were several other people who had the same idea, strangers who had just come together at that moment. And we were able to see it just with our binoculars, which was nice not to have to use a big telescope. It was only a little snowball of a comet compared to what it was like at the beginning of this century when my father saw it, and when I think many people were expecting something brilliant and dramatic across the sky. But it was still worth seeing, and I think that there was some special bond among the people who made the effort to still try to greet this celestial event in the middle of the night. The comet at equinox. Last night, because there were stars, I woke at 4, entered the sub-freezing weather with my dog, and drove to the mountain with cold hands. They stood already there, the man, the woman, the boy, gazing at the sky for the chance of a lifetime. A tall stranger who spoke like an engineer scanned the dark beside them. He told us where to start, the 3 electric lights on the horizon, at what angle to proceed upward to the trapezoid of stars that pointed the eye down again to where the comet blurred. My dog, meanwhile, engrossed in earthly smells, nuzzled each hand that hung down, waiting its turn at binoculars. The comet had a tail that first night of spring, visible to the naked eye. And so our small human group stood an hour on the mountain between 2 tails, the friendly one wagging close to us on earth, and that faint one, more like a memory, holding our eyes on the sky. Trees never play the lottery. They put out their hands to gather sunlight, letting the wind's soft molecules toss green along their veins. They don't ask for a small change. It's the oldest, unminable gold they're out for. Ganglia of light inhabit their sapwood's well-kept secret, how the roots, clinging like heathens to holy ground, feed on heaven. I have 2 pacifist poems, and I'd like to read them now. Both were inspired by Sweden, which is a pacifist nation, which unfortunately has a very profitable arms industry. So I think Sweden is at this point in conflict with itself and is running into some internal difficulty because of it. There's a naval installation on the Karlskrona archipelago in southern Sweden, which is off limits to non-Swedes, and I somehow managed to be taken there anyway by my Swedish friends. That's the place where the Navy has its secret installations, but it's also, of course, the place where the Soviet subs ran aground several times, and there was a case of frogmen leaping about, leaving their submarines, scouting the Swedish coast, and the Swedish Navy wasn't able to catch anyone, and the boat escaped, and that sort of tells you something about the efficiency of the Swedish Navy, but it is, after all, a pacifist nation, so they're not looking to catch spies particularly. On the Karlskrona archipelago, we stand on a concrete cannon platform between wars, looking out to sea through dark green oak leaves. Below us, mountain ash, wild chervil, quiet ferns. No Soviet frogmen break the peace this summer afternoon, though they've nosed their subs up here, diagrammed every meter of this coast, rattled nuclear arms and Swedish nerves. The Swedes do what they can to stay as neutral as the natural world. Down the granite ramp, I follow a one-track path away from warm rocks, from my friends on the sand. Nothing but peace here. Things that grow in the green world need quiet, want days of sun and wind. Gulls with shadows under their wings ride the soft airways, wrapped in light. Raspberries don't remember why a gray artillery stand was raised here, and no sane vision can comprehend frogmen popping up from the sea, leaping in their slick skins from rock to rock like nightmares, disappearing again in the startled dark. Well, that poem is 7 years old, and with the recent events in East Germany and Poland, it suddenly feels very dated, and yet 7 years isn't a long time, and I remember the feelings of helplessness among the Swedes 10 years ago. I lived in Sweden in 1980, so almost 10 years ago. It became known that the Soviets had built a military highway right up to the Swedish border through Finland, and so the Swedes began to say, well, what can we do? How can we defend ourselves? There was no way, so they had come up with a plan to issue gas masks to every member of the population, which would allow 12 hours more life if chemical warfare were used on the Swedish population. So there's a curious vulnerability, and you know, I've never really looked at the Soviet Union as the evil empire, but when I lived in Sweden, I became aware that it was perceived directly as a threat there. Of course, things are changing so rapidly there. It was a great tragedy in the night between February and March of 1986 when the brilliant Swedish Prime Minister Olof Palme was assassinated as he and his wife walked home on a street in Stockholm from the movies. They had gone to see the Amadeus film, and Palme did not believe in bodyguards. He was an outspoken pacifist and a leader in the movement for world peace. And it's never been found. You've probably read in the paper that they had arrested someone they thought was the murderer, that his wife had identified positively as the assassin, but that he had an alibi, and so he was released, and so they still don't know who murdered Palme. And when that happened, I was so distraught for about 3 days because I admired this person more than any other world leader at the time. And who would want to assassinate him? I mean, he was a linguist. He was a highly cultured and educated, benign person. He was a brilliant debater, but he was just a very fair-minded person, and Sweden is totally insignificant in world politics. Why assassinate the leader of Sweden? And then, a year after he was assassinated, the high-ranking official in the Ministry of War was pushed under a subway train, and it was witnessed by 4 people in the subway, and after an official government investigation, the conclusion was it was an accident. So some kind of cover-up is going on there. And then it finally occurred to me that the only logical person or group that would benefit from Palme's assassination is the war industry. And I have no reason, no proof of this, but it seems logical to me that Bofors, which was at the time of his assassination, being investigated for illegal arms sales to Iran, had a motive, and that's never come out. But I think, in a way, it's a horrible realization to think that even the leader of a country could be assassinated by a corporation, a group. This is pure speculation at this point, but I think we really have to question a lot of policies wherever arms are involved. Is freedom at stake? Is what's happening in El Salvador now? Things that require really a lot of critical attention to who's benefiting, who's profiting. and who's being harmed. This poem was for Olof Palme. Palme's blood on the snow on the streets of Stockholm, the mind's brilliance draining into the street. It will not stop. I think of all the scenes of blood at this moment breaking in the world and see the great whales slaughtered. The Red Sea of battered seal flesh churning with anger and grief. I see the wolf with closed eyes panting her last breath, her blood on the snow under the chopper's grin of blades. Natives of El Salvador, Palme's blood seeping into the earth of Sweden, blood of leaders who do not want bodyguards, blood of animals who are at peace with the world and never planned a war, blood of native peoples who do not want our order, do not want our wealth. Through the seams of cement, the linear edge of steel, Palme's blood runs down to the roots of the world tree. It stains again the waters of memory's well. It will not stop. That red shadow seeps into the very vein of life, is the vein that will go on into everything that lives. The heart will not stop. And I think, though our media has a way of playing up the things it wants us to see and playing down the things that we shouldn't be informed of as a nation, I think we have to look hard, we have to look underneath. We have to question whether the media is not perhaps the somehow complicit partner of the corporate world out there. And again, who benefits from war? Why should we wage war? Well, the death of Palme, when I saw he was shot with a Magnum, what, 747? What? No, I probably got the airline and the gun mixed up. But with a weapon that left a large hole in his body, and the blood from his lifeblood stained the streets, the cobblestones, and the snow of Stockholm. It was there for days, and I saw that in the New York Times photo. And when I saw it, I immediately thought of the blood of slaughtered animals, the whales and the baby harp seals. And so all the violence in the world is connected. And those of us who would like to see truly a gentler, kinder nation, we have to do more than just change the vocabulary. We really have to make major changes in ourselves and in the world around us. One of the negative changes that disturbs me very much, in the last 2 years, the U.S. government patent office has begun accepting patents on animals. This is not the kind of change I have in mind. We are now biogenetically engineering animals, cows to have gigantic udders so they will produce more milk, and pigs to bear lean, low cholesterol pork. And I think it's really a disturbing change. Someone, Jeremy Rifkin from the Foundation for Economic Trends, has referred to the whole biogenetic engineering development as this is biogenetic material has become the Play-Doh of the corporate world. 2 years ago, DuPont marketed a manufactured product, which is a living mouse, but because they've introduced an oncogene, a cancer receptive gene, into the mouse, it's now no longer a creature or an animal in legal status. Not that it would have any rights, very many rights as an animal anyway, but this seems to me a really grotesque alteration in the way we think about life to change, because we have altered the genetic makeup of a mouse. This animal is now marketed as a manufactured product and has exactly the same legal status as a tennis racket or a toaster oven. And I think when we start calling animals manufacturers, which is the technical term used now, something grotesque is going on, and we shouldn't lose sight of what an animal is, a sentient being that feels pain and pleasure just as we do. You've probably noted the references in various fields to like resource management. They talk about animals as renewable resources. They talk about harvesting the deer this year. But harvesting is really a word that applies to plants And when we start to harvest animals, we're actually lowering their status to that of less sentient being than they really are. And I wrote this poem with those concerns in mind. A daily prayer for the poisoned, the blinded, the shocked, the trapped, the sacrificed. An old book says that Adam named them before he was cast out, that Noah herded them into the God-driven ark so they might live. We ate no flesh in Eden, but afterwards, when things got hard, we forgot the peaceful kinship of that ancient kingdom. As our teeth sank into their flesh, we had to deny them. And so we said they had no souls, no reason, no thumbs, no speech. We were so different. We made a chain of things to protect us: fire, medicine, our locking houses, many kinds of clothes. And we renamed them farm product, fur crop, renewable resource. Pray that we will see their faces again in the mirror of creation. The miracle of animals, their clear eyes, meaning more than profit to our own. And there is something that every one of us can do. If you, Martin Buber, you probably know the Jewish theologian who wrote the well-known book I, Thou, and I was surprised to learn some time ago that he had developed his whole concept of standing in an I-Thou relationship with an other being from looking into the eyes of a horse on his grandfather's farm. I had somehow naturally assumed that he had developed the I-Thou concept in relationship between two humans, but it was actually a horse that he first felt he stood in I-Thou relationship with, and that the horse totally accepted him as an other presence, and that he and the horse were bonded as subject to subject, that neither was looking at the other as an object. And so he said later in his writings somewhere that the eyes of an animal have the capacity for a great language, and I love that quote very much. The animal rights movement, one of the areas that it has worked very hard to change is the current cosmetic testing. You've probably heard or seen pictures of the Dre's rabbit test, and they put rabbits in stockades and force their eyes open. Rabbits' eyes are, of course, very sensitive, and the eyes are held open while oven cleaner or other caustic substances, any product that's marketed, listed as new and improved, may be the result of this kind of testing. And when we're talking particularly about soaps, shampoos, and cosmetics, do we really have the right to inflict that kind of pain for the sake of our non-essential pleasure and comfort and vanity? And I don't think we do. And I think it's important to tell the corporate world that we don't need cruelty in order to be happy, that we don't need to inflict pain and suffering on these helpless beings to gratify our sense of vanity or beauty. And so one thing everybody can do, it requires a little effort, and it's always hard to change habits, but you can try to purchase products that are not tested on animals, especially when, I mean, this isn't a question of human life or death at all. This is simply a question of convenience for us. And I think if consumers could send a message back to the producers that we don't want animal cruelty for the sake of our convenience and pleasure, we don't need it. It's obscene to inflict that kind of pain. I think things would change. I think they would change. They have been changing a little. But it requires people to do something, you know, to register their voice with their Congress people, and you know, if you have the time to familiarize yourself. PETA has put out a cruelty-free shopping guide, which anyone's welcome to. I'm sorry, I should have brought copies of it, but if you want to see, here's a list of corporations that produce most household products and cosmetics that don't test on animals. And many of these products, like you probably know Tom's of Maine, anybody into the health food store, countercultural scene would know his toothpaste and deodorants, and they're really superior products. There's a little, often they cost a little bit more, but most of them are not that much more expensive. So yeah, I would hope that's one thing people could feel moved to do that really doesn't affect their way of life. It doesn't cause too much inconvenience. It's simply changing shopping habits and buying things that are not tested on animals. I was an only child, and I think because of that I probably bonded with animals at an early age. I had cats and a dog, and so I was very, I got a lot of emotional connection with animals, and from looking into their eyes, I remember from an early age having a sense of communion with another being by that open gaze and really taking in this other presence, not having any intention or design, but just observing, knowing that there was another subject looking back at me. And that caused a lot of pain because a lot of animals I saw were entrapped or in dying. And I remember the dying birds and looking into their eyes. So I know that's what's made an animal rights activist out of me. But Alice Walker, who you must know, the novelist of The Color Purple, Alice Walker, has recently become an animal rights spokesperson. And in one of her short stories, she talks about noticing the eyes of animals and looking in their eyes and knowing that they enjoyed life when they're free, of course. That we're here, I think, to find joy in life and not to inflict suffering on each other. And I think it won't stop. We can't cure the problems of the world as long as we address humans only, because it's a web of existence and all life is bound up in it together. And we have to extend our compassion as far as we possibly can and include the other animals as well, if it's truly to be better for humans too. Well, some years ago, 3 years ago, I studied at the Atlantic Center for the Arts in Florida with the poet William Stafford, and we went down to the Everglades one weekend and came there just about dusk when all the visitors had left, and that's an ideal time for visiting a wildlife sanctuary because many animals and birds become active at twilight. And so there was a lot of activity. A lot of birds were just swooping in to feed and to go back to their nests. And my two companions were out on the boardwalk rather far away from me photographing. And I was looking at a gorgeous purple bird when I suddenly heard this clomping footstep in the bushes beside me. And I thought, well, a human being wouldn't be down there, and that sounds heavy enough that it could only be a human or an alligator footstep, but they wouldn't let a helpless tourist like myself just stand here unprotected if alligators were allowed to walk out of the bushes and accost you. And I looked, and there was a somewhat small, about a 6-foot alligator standing very close to me. And that was very alarming. And I looked at him, and he looked at me, but I didn't have this. I had the sense that he had something else in mind other than eating me. So he was, in fact, dragging something in his mouth. And so when I got a little distance on the situation, I began to watch with interest. And he kept an eye on me as I was keeping an eye on him, but he went about his business and crossed over. And this poem is about that episode, though it contrasts an alligator that I'd found in a roadside zoo as a small child. And in a way, this alligator enjoying its life in its natural habitat made up for the distress that I felt at the first alligator's captivity. Paradise Key. Wedged in a small tank of water at the roadside zoo, a 5-foot alligator curves like a busted tire, in so tight his mouth goes up one hot metal side, his tail up the other. His eyes open straight into mine. I'm 9. I can see how bad it feels. My parents know it's wrong. Silent, embarrassed, we all stand there till Dad politely questions the ticket man, "Isn't that tank too small?" "Nah," says the gas hand who doubles as zookeeper. "He likes it that way." We climb back into our car and drive away. Now in the Everglades, the place they call Paradise Key, a little gator surprises me as he steps out of the sawgrass 6 feet away. He crosses my path, dragging a few reeds over to the pool where bluegills swim. He means to go fishing. Something sly and cheerful bubbles in his glance and in me, watching him, watching me from the water. He has his life. He has plans. That's what his eyes say. And suddenly I want to bless the tribe of alligators and the beauty of horned and glistening skin. I see the primeval symmetry of reptiles floating with their prey in the Everglades. May they go free of all I know about the tribe of man. I don't think that little alligator could have been 6 feet. I mean, maybe 2 feet body and 2 feet tail. I must have exaggerated. It was a tall alligator story. Well, I recently bought a copy of the Audubon Guide to Familiar Mammals, which is a very pretty little pocketbook that you can take out as a field guide into the woods. And it has lovely photographs and descriptions. And it looked like a good, solid naturalist's guide, pretty factual, I thought. But as I started reading through it after I'd bought it, I saw it was very anthropocentric, and that it was much more subjective than one would expect from a purportedly scientific book. And it said, in describing the Norway rat, the opening sentence was, "There's almost nothing good to be said about the Norway rat." And I thought, well, that's not true scientific objectivity here. So as I read through some of the others, I decided to sort of carry this anthropocentric direction in a positive way a little further. And so this is a revisionist version of the description in the Audubon Pocket Guide to Familiar Mammals. The Audubon Pocket Guide to Familiar Mammals describes the eastern wood rat, or pack rat, who gathers scraps of metal, buckles and spoons, cartridges and coins to adorn her nest. Her 5-fingered hindpaws are shaped like human hands. A true peddler, she quickly trades a mislaid wristwatch for an old wedding band. No hawker of lost hopes, but a champion of commerce. She often leaves a cherished prize behind, just a fair exchange for her latest find. Not due to honesty, the guide proclaims, but because she can't carry so many things. I think about the origin of honesty. It's good to live with warm, simple hands that can't take more than they can hold. I must confess, I think we owe it to animals not to anthropomorphize them the way, did any of you see that film, The Bear, recently? It was a great film with wonderful wildlife shots, but it was really hard to tell what was natural bear behavior and what was made to look like bears behave like humans. I think there was a little too much contrived behavior in that film. And I think it's important to try to understand animals as they are in their natural setting, which is why I'm also opposed to dissection. I think it's really kind of a weird way of learning about animals by killing them and taking them apart. And it seems if you want to teach biology, which is actually the science of life, you shouldn't go around killing your subject first and then examining it. It seems like ethology would be a much better way to learn about animals, to see them in their natural habitat and see how they live when we don't interfere with them. I'm going to read a few of my recent poems now. When I was between the ages of 3 and 4, I had some sort of undiagnosable illness that the doctors didn't give my parents a very good prognosis about. And so I was in the hospital for weeks, and I was getting weaker. I remember I couldn't even sit up in bed. And then my mother decided to take me out, and so my parents came and brought me home. And somehow all the skin had peeled off my hands and feet, and I don't remember too much. I just remember this lengthy illness of lying in bed. And my mother read somewhere marrow bone soup, that's the thing that will cure me. So she spooned marrow bone broth into me, and I remember the taste of it. And sometime after that, maybe at the turning point when I started to get better, I started having visitations of large wolf-like animals in my dreams, and at first I really wasn't sure if I was dreaming or not at first, and I now think maybe because of the bone imagery and somewhere someone had read me a story about a wolf, but they became sort of like vision wolves. I would wake up and see one standing next to my bed, the entire length of the bed, and looking at me with very intense eyes, and I would find myself in a cold sweat suddenly sitting up in bed and watching the wolf image fade away. And that was something that, in a way, it seems to me now that I know a little about Native American shamanism and those traditions of animal allies and spirit guides, it seems to me maybe that was an animal ally coming to chase the illness away from me. In any case, I had a very great curiosity about wolves and a sort of an ambivalent feeling towards them all through childhood. Those visions lasted for about 4 years, and then they stopped coming. But when I was much older, I learned that the Native American clan, the Lenape clan, that lived right in my vicinity was the Munsee, or Minsi, which is the wolf clan. And so that made a tremendous connection. And I began to think that somehow those wolves were there to lead me back to reconnect with a Native American spirituality and vision of our place on Earth. And so part of my interest in exploring that Native American tradition in the Lehigh Valley and more broadly comes from those very early childhood dreams, which I'll never know what they were really about, but I can use them imaginatively. And you probably know that in the Native American tradition, the young person on the threshold of adolescence is sent out on a vision quest to fast by himself or herself in the wilderness for 3 days, perhaps longer, and to await a vision. And that vision comes to them often in the form of an animal and is their spirit guide, the being that will always be available in times of crisis or when counsel or help is needed to come to that person. And that becomes their power animal or their animal ally as well. And I don't think it's limited to one experience or one animal, but usually most people who do this have a certain animal they identify themselves with. And because these wolves sought me out at a very early age, it seemed to me that the wolf was my spirit animal. But I think anything in life can be used as an ally. It depends on how we see it. And this summer I was in Ithaca in a place in the country, and I just had a really unpleasant phone call conversation with someone, and I had been in a good mood before, and you know how your mood can shift suddenly, and it seemed to me that suddenly there was this big black blotch right on the paper that I wanted to write on, and everything seemed to be darkened by this. And so I went into the bathroom, and there on the sink was the most enormous spider. It was that big. It was a huge black spider, and I thought, how strange. It's almost like I called it forth. And I phoned a friend who's very knowledgeable about bugs, and I said, I've never seen anything this big before. And she said, oh, it's probably a wolf spider. We have those in the country. It sounds like what you're describing there. I thought, oh, it's wolf connection again. So that called up this poem, Midnight Caller. Wolf spider came when I was in trouble, sat beside my sink, his fat black body, 8 big arms to help me ward off trouble. Wolf spider stayed, so I sat down to think. Wove me a web to hide myself from trouble, spun me a thread to tie up trouble tight, spun me another that pulled me out of danger. I owe spider a chunk of thanks tonight. And in this poem, I try to capture the sense of these wolf dreams. I ended up, many years later, seeing a breed of dog, the Kuvas, a Hungarian sheepdog, that looked very close to my wolf visions of childhood. And so that's been my dog companion for the last 13 years. And probably she wasn't identical, but there was some association there. And so my dog now sometimes stands beside my bed, and I like to go back to those childhood feelings. The ally. My white dog glides by my bed like the shadow of night, and I'm tossed back to childhood, dreaming, awake on the couch in the living room, and the huge wolf turns his gleaming head, opens wider and wider his eye till I'm bolt upright, breathless in a sweat, and slowly he turns his great face away. And the message I carry forever in my bones has tuned me a little different from humans. I awake many nights with wolves in the room, wolf eyes, wolf fear, wolf love that never leaves me. And while I'm on the subject of visions and perhaps the supernatural, I wrote this poem when I learned that someone's son had committed suicide, and I looked at him, and I somehow saw next to him this person that I knew he was grieving for. We were gathered around a dinner table, and so this was a kind of an attempt to make an opening in our lives, even for those who have passed on. Guests. Sometimes the dead sit down to dinner with us, paying little attention to etiquette now that their elbows don't get in the way. It's not a question anymore of where the salad plate is placed or which fork to use. It's our conversation they hunger for, and the chance for a deep exchange of glances. Long after the meal has ended and the table's been cleared, they remain quietly among us, savoring our voices, our warm faces, the old familiarity. It's good to remember them well and to speak now and then their names. So all of us will know the door is always open, so the gratitude can flow both ways. And I spend a lot of time walking the Monocacy Creek, and it seems ever changing and ever the same, and I suppose there's a poem in that, but I think Goethe wrote it already 2 centuries ago about continuity and change. But this seemed that the river spoke this poem, River Song. River changes after rain, but at bottom he's the same. I see him bending over roots, laughing, splurging, spreading his wet, coaxing the solid earth under him. He ran away with the ducks today. Tonight he shines a glide-down path for strong wild geese who cover his rippling skin, his murmuring, with well-preened flocks of feather. River, he has his highs and his lows, but over and over and on he goes. River just flows, 'cause river knows how to turn those dark stones silver. And I'd like to read my long Monocacy poem, the one where I get most in touch with the Lenape predecessors of the city of Bethlehem, and create some sort of imaginative identification with them. I love to walk there. I always feel very restored and rejuvenated after I walk along this stream. And I thought perhaps it's just because it's a nature sanctuary and it's very peaceful, and I can forget my problems there very quickly. But I read a book about chakras a year ago, and there I discovered the Hindu concept of prana, or vital life force, life energy. And amazingly enough, one of the places they say you can gather prana in the natural world, and the best place to gather the highest prana is along a stream of flowing water when the sunlight is shining on the stream when it's rushing over rocks. And that may simply be good ions that you're picking up. The Hindus called it prana, but it was interesting to me that probably that's what I've been gathering prana on all those walks. This is learning to float in the Monocacy. Crouching beside the sunlit water, guided by the quiet stream, I learn the way to go. Knowing how it bends and goes on beyond autumn's leafy arc of reflection, I bend to learn the other history of this place, releasing the creek's real name, Monocacy, stream that bends. Digging under the city of Bethlehem, ignoring 300 years of imported history, I am calling back the original people of this place. I am calling the original people to help me free a place for myself where I can guard whatever is left of wildness and let it grow. In awe of the stream, the trees, the tribes of the Lenape, before Lord Delaware marked them with his name, I dig and call. Minsi, Unami, the well-grown, straight-looked first people move and crouch here 200 years before my ancestors even dream of leaving Sweden. Turning back Bethlehem, I hear the Minsi chanting, dancing the wolf, their totem. Close to the Monocacy, the wolf clan hunted. Images of animals ran through their language, shaped their self-knowledge. Music, the mysteries of kinship, have been with us from all time. We have been bathed in voices from before the light. 1,000,000 secret tongues have entered the wilderness, risen in blades of grass, their visions passing. Woodchuck murmurs out of her sleeve of earth. High in a dead tree, greyhawk eyes me. The earth is all clue. My own shape and surface are as green and fluid as the Monocacy. Dancing the animal movements, wolf dog, deer, and badger, I learn the community of beasts. We are a confluence of ancient powers. When I was young, the mist wolves encircled me. 3 times I saw them prowling, silent. Huge they appeared as I lay sleeping. What were they guarding? Now they lead me to go deeper than Bethlehem in my native place, to find my bonds to a soft-footed race that did not slouch, to beasts that do not bring apocalyptic terror. How I want to repair the long denial of this place, immerse the image of this land in its own real history, not the Europeans only, but the spirits of wolf and badger, the black bear who do not gather here now, but whose name the road wears I walk on. Every day I gather myself more into this place, and in the night, awake with darkness, all my feeling lies with this green earth, this moving water. I have found by fire my pouch of remedies, pressed wild fox grapes to my simple tongue, recomposed the beaver bone by bone. My intestines shine like crystal. I bear the river's weight, dancing into wilder clarity. The eyes of creatures bless me. The waters tell me I am turning into the right direction, dancing down the wind. I am drifting deep in a reverie of rivers. My small mouth churns with song. All that is left of me streams with a deep, eddying knowledge of how to go home. And I'd like to close with another animal spirit poem, Red-Tailed Hawk. I have the great blessing of living very close to a nature sanctuary, and as the Lehigh Valley is more and more developed, the wildlife concentrates there more and more. So this year I've seen a blue heron, which I'd never seen there before, numerous hawks, and 2 years ago I saw a red-tailed hawk actually swooped right across the windshield of my car and landed, and I pulled over. I was driving down the road to the sanctuary, and I got out of the car. I was looking all around the grass because I had seen it come down and land, and I was looking, and I suddenly felt that prickling sensation on the back of the neck that, you know, someone's looking at you, and there it was on the telephone wire above me. And again, it was a very close contact, and if you know, the hawk's eyes really stare. It's not their lack of etiquette, it's their musculature. But you really are confronted with something when looking at a hawk, with the intense power and energy in the body, and the claws and the beak, and then that fierce gaze. There's something very fierce about hawks, obviously. Red-tailed hawk. The great white belly of the bird is streaked with black, like war paint. And behind that fierceness, 2 rust-red, strong-red tail feathers point down. Do not look away. This is the season of visions. The 4-sided rain sent this spirit guide, who stares down, watching you from the giant pine. His living, solid face demands that you recall the branching path, that led you to this hour, this place. Do not turn away. Earth waits for your hand, the speech of roots and mosses your tongue makes. Not every human is gifted with earth's song. Do not forget, the hawk's beak can pierce through hollowness and flesh, and the fierce spirit lives on. Let your blood merge with the river's water. There's no true power without some dying. Die in the right way. Make your song strong. Thank you.